So hi Steve,
Hello.
today is the final instalment of our series in DPC interviews. Before we dive into the really interesting world, which I'm sure we could talk about for a very long time, can you tell us a little bit about your experience in the water sector?
Yes, of course. I head up the construction engineering team here at Burgess Salmon, as you know, and I've been qualified almost 25 years, I think this next year, and I've worked for the water sector ever since I qualified. So a variety of water companies, advising them on the development of their template contracts for works, services, technology supply, as well as advising on specific projects.
Wonderful. So lots of experience to draw upon in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. And added to that, I do an awful lot of work in other sectors too. So nuclear, transport, defence.
Yeah.
So I see similar issues across a variety of sectors.
Absolutely. So if we think about DPC, drawing into our subject matter, and focusing on construction and O&M, like you say, drawing from our experience of other industries and other PFI, what can we expect to see in terms of the impact on the supply chain from both a construction and O&M perspective?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think none of us really know the answer yet. I think we're in a very different world to where we were when most of the PFI schemes that were last sort of promoted were developed and negotiated. I think the contractor community is a lot more risk averse than they used to be, and I think that's born out of some major events that occurred in very quick succession in relative terms. We had the global financial crisis back in the noughties, that was followed very quickly by Brexit, then we had COVID, then we had Ukraine. So you had this drumbeat of major events arising that was really impacting the contractors commercially. And I think that resulted in a bit of a sea change in the way they approached risk and their appetite for risk. So I think that is going to have quite an impact. You know, obviously the aspiration is to transfer as much risk as you possibly can to the supply chain, and that was largely achieved to a satisfactory level in the old PFI projects. I'm not sure we're going to have that here, and I think when you add the additional complexity that these water sector projects are going to generate, you know, we're talking about huge civil engineering undertakings, and as soon as you go into the ground in any material way, we both know that amplifies the risks very, very substantially. Absolutely. And so I think we're not going to have these sort of largely fixed price contracts. You know, most contracts of that nature on a target cost basis, and trying to establish a target that gives a meaningful indication of ultimate cost outturn is a huge challenge on projects of that nature. And it probably means that the funders, the investors, might have to feel a little uncomfortable as to what they ultimately end up with.
Okay, so drawing back on that, the expectation here is for a procurement model that expects that stricter risk transfer, certainly than we're seeing in the water sector at the moment, our clients expecting, and also contractors taking on board. What can we expect to see, but also what can water companies and potential cap entities do when they're going into these projects to try and understand that potential risk transfer going forward so that they can get it right at the beginning?
Well, I think they need a large cohort of very experienced people who've been doing infrastructure projects in recent years. I think that's the starting point, and understanding the technical and practical things that need to be done to create an environment where you can get your arms around the scale of these risks, and that's a real challenge. You know, if you think of equivalent infrastructure projects where there's a huge amount of site characterization studies that need to be undertaken to really understand, you know, what's in the ground, what are these geotechnical challenges. You know, it's a huge amount that needs to be done in advance and done well in order to be able to reduce the level of uncertainty to a level where you can, I guess, optimize the balance between risk retained by CAP and risk assumed by the supply chain. And I think that's another issue actually when it comes to supply chain is capacity. which just adds even more complexity and challenge. We know that there's an awful lot of infrastructure programs already up and running, really substantial programs, Sizewell C, for example, HS2 and others. And that's sucking up a lot of quality resource. And it's not just in the doers, the contractors, the technology suppliers, it's in those administering the contracts, those undertaking the program management, the project management. We know from our own experience that there isn't an inexhaustible supply of these quality individuals. And so actually competing for the best people to deliver the optimal outcome is going to be a huge challenge.
Yeah. So I think to summarise, the key here will be for people to not just understand the procurement model and what's being put out and to get clarity on what the model looks like with a backdrop of experience in previous similar models, but also to really understand and shape that model with a knowledge of what the market looks like and risk appetite and also the risk involved in these projects.
I think that's right.